to look at birds. It so happened there was, over time, a pond built up, and then bird lovers will see that migratory birds, trans-migratory birds from Siberia, during the winter months, they will fly all the way to the south, Antarctica. And on the way, they make a transit stop in Singapore at Marina South at this pond. Now in Singapore, we are usually don't like empty spaces. So we fill it up with tall buildings, commercial development, so-called modernization. Mind you, they are important because people do value urbanization as well. So when they saw this Marina South, which is a flat land, duck pond, they got offers, commercial developers, and they want to build shopping malls and so on over in the mall, in the area. So initially, the government gave the green light to go ahead, but in 1992, there were a lot of protests from the Nature Society of Singapore, joined by many, a substantial portion of the population. And sufficient enough for the government to take notice and for the media to report on it. The question before us is, how much is a duck pond worth? Now, statements that came out are such that we don't really know how to price a duck pond. You know, duck pond is an environmental, green good, non-market good. You don't go into a supermarket and buy a duck pond. They just don't sell, right? So we don't have a ready available prices. And because of that, it's hard to decide. But on the other side of the equation, we have the commercial developers offering $100 million. So you have $100 million on the left-hand side. We have a non-market duck pond on the right-hand side. You can't make decisions. And then the media found out there was one person working on this aspect at the National University of Singapore. And that was me. So the guy on the right-hand side of the picture is me. And I was brought down to Marina South to look at this place. The one on the left is the president of the Nature Society of Singapore, the philosopher, Dr. Ho. Now, it made us look as if that we are fighting each other, and subsequently there were follow-up debates in the public as well as the university between me and him. But actually, Nature Society got me all wrong. I'm actually in favor of nature, but I just need to know what is the trade-off. You cannot say that having a mall, having jobs, income, modernization is not important, right? You have to admit that they do give us benefits as well. You cannot say that the duck pond is not important too, because there's a green area, there's bird lovers, there is value put on by concerned citizens of Singapore. But how best to solve this problem, I think, is best to put it on dollar terms, so that both sides of the equation you can compare. There's a common denominator. Remember, I said 100 million on the left, duck pond on the right. You can't decide like this, right? So you need to compare on equal terms. By the way, those of you who are familiar with Singapore, do you know what is in Marina South now? The casino. Okay? The Sands Casino, Marina Bay Sands. That's Marina's house. Trees. The value of a tree is not just the timber, lumber, but tree provides beauty, tree provides shade, tree provides a distraction from our everyday stress of life. But unfortunately, trees get into the way of projects. So when you build a road, you have a tree blocking, they'll get rid of the tree. So if you do a cost benefit if you don't take care of the tree's value, that's incomplete, that's wrong. If you take care of the tree value, but include the price of timber and lumber, that's also wrong, that's incomplete. So the value of trees goes beyond that. Now going back to what I said earlier, that when you put the duck pond on dollar sign, you can compare to the dollar sign offered by commercial. People always say, oh, but if you do that, you are going to get low values for environment. That is just a presumption, Many times it's not true. Maybe way back in the past. But now, society is more educated. Society is more exposed to world information. The internet generation has transformed the generation of the present society versus the past. So these things have become much more important. I show you this creature because this is a real life example. In 1980s, in Australia, New South Wales, a farmer was trying to sell the land. Now, fortunately or unfortunately for the farmer, they found that the land contains the only remaining 3 left habitats for this lovable Australian creature called the wombat. The Nature Society took a different course. They do not ask, do you object and get your signature? They ask, are you willing to pay to a trust fund? And a collection of that fund will go to buy the land. And they did not stop in New South Wales. They go outside New South Wales. They go to Victoria, they go to Western Australia to ask the people there, would you contribute something to save the habitat for this wombat? And people say, yes, here's $1, yes, $100. And then they didn't stop at people. They went to the firms. Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank is famous for the green activities. Whether they do it altruistically or not, that's a different story. But they do contribute to green issues. So they went to these big banks and say, would you save this wombat? And bank says, yes, here's 100,000. So they went around to collect all these values, and they got far, far more than what the farmer would have got from selling the land to the commercial developer. What's the moral of the story? The story is that if you have an agency that collects this data from you and I, from firms and so on, then we are going to have a better picture of what is being traded off. You're going to get values of how society look at such things. It's because in many countries, we don't have this agency, somebody to coordinate these values. All we have is petition. Do you petition? You should know. Petition has a problem because petition means one man or one woman, one vote. That's all. They don't tell you the intensity of that vote. Secondly, there are 5 million people in Singapore. If you got 100,000 signature, that's nothing because there's still so many people have not signed the petition. So that method doesn't work. Solid waste, I need not spend too much here, but as the country continues to grow, they are going to be more wealthier. With more wealthier, they're going to purchase more goods, consumer goods, and they're going to have to find ways to throw them. So waste disposal is a very big problem in ASEAN countries. This is the current and the projected solid waste amounts for all the ASEAN countries. Bad picture, right? Now, again, I want to refer to Singapore. Singapore is a city-state. We don't have enough land. Because of land scarcity, land prices are high. So we cannot afford to have empty land converted to landfills. So if you come to Singapore, do you know where is our landfill? It's on an island south of Singapore. So every day we have tons of garbage that is taken by boat from the mainland to this southern island, is dumped there every day. This landfill site of an offshore island will last until 2045 and its maximum capacity. So what do we do? Do we look around for another island? There's no answer, you know. Because when we took that island, National Geographic calls it a major engineering feat. Because one big island, too small, they build a wall deep into the sea, they suck the water out, create empty space. They took the corals, transplant each one of them to other islands, and then hope that the fish will all follow the corals. They got rid of all the fishermen living on the island, right? So it carries the cost, but it is necessary. We have no land to put the landfill, right? Recycling. People say recycling is so important. Yes, it is important. But then people also say you should minimize waste. That's also important. But you know, recycling depends upon waste. And that's why many recycling companies in ASEAN, including Singapore, they cannot survive without heavy subsidies from the government. And heavy subsidies from the government is also needed to build incinerators. So one must look at this in totality and not just segmentation of recycling is a solution. People, if interested in the solid waste literature, there are 3 areas. Usually people talk about taxation or pricing of waste. You know, many parts of Asia, we just throw our waste. We don't look at how much we throw, and we are priced according to how much we throw. Much as we like it to do this in Singapore, we can't do it because 80% of our population live in high rise. And so it's not easy to determine how much is the waste per household, per unit. But if you have landed properties, when you, like in Japan or in some parts of US, you can throw the garbage outside. There's a garbage bag, some size, and you are paid according to how much you throw. And if you pay for that, people will behaviorally change, right? It's when people don't care, they're not charged according to how much they throw, they just couldn't be bothered. So a lot of literature has to deal with these pricing issues. And the third one I mentioned is recycling. The fourth concern is transboundary pollution. Transboundary pollution is getting worse in ASEAN. We have acid rain problem. We have transboundary smoke haze problem. Of course, the second one, you can really see, you can really smell, and it chokes you. You have not experienced it before, many of you. When you step out of the house, it chokes you, literally. The smell is terrible. Burning sulfur. You can't breathe. And last month, it affected Singapore for 11 days. In some parts of Singapore, it's like a fog, you know. You put out a hand, you can't see. I'm exaggerating, but it is very serious. It affects health, it affects productivity. The tourists won't come, conventions and businesses were cancelled. People cannot swim, cannot jog. All these are costs. So these are cross-border pollution. Pollution that rises from one country, unidirectionally goes to the other country. And people treat the air as if it's free, right? Now, there's intense effort looking at how to solve this problem. So if you're interested in this literature, go and look into that. And we can borrow examples of how they solve it in the Canada-US acid rain problem, in the US-Mexico problem, in the Blue Danube River. There are lessons to be learned from there. There are also a lot of theoretical literature behind this, which I won't go into. But if you're interested, you should take a look at this. I have proposed one solution, which is sort of academic, and that is, if you can't use the example of Indonesia. The fire caused the haze. Now, Singapore doesn't have any ways to deal with Indonesia. No leverage. But Singapore may have leverage over a third country. They have to identify what this third country is. If Singapore can use this leverage on a third country for their help, that will be good, provided that this third-party country have leverage on Indonesia. So this intervention method may work. Another solution that I've talked about is that find out what is the cost of clearing the land by fire. Find out what is the cost of clearing land without fire. Take the difference. Then stakeholders see how they can share in the cost of the difference. Because this is cheaper than business as usual, where the cost is much more substantial. One can also think about, traditionally, you can change the law in Indonesia. Instead of plantation owners who are found negligent pay for the cost, why not have the law of strict liability? If the fire is found on your land, you pay. I don't care what the excuse are, what effort you have done, you pay. And this will create an incentive for plantation owners to be more careful. They will monitor carefully. The moment a small fire starts, they'll put it out fast. That's another solution. Another solution, reward the community to spot fires. You can think of many of these ways to try to minimize the fire. You cannot stop all fires because in the dry season, a small spark can set the land on fire, right? But you can try to minimize it before it becomes too big and before it crosses over to other countries. I should be able to get this done in 10 minutes. Huh?
20 minutes.
Oh, okay. Because I thought I have taken too long. These are some examples of the forest fires. People always say, is the plantation owners. Yes, I'm sure some of the plantation owners are guilty. But there's also the genuine case where the fire is started by a neighboring land. The fire, the wind blows to my land's plantation on fire. I get blamed, right? I don't know how to resolve this problem. That itself is transboundary, you know. So to just blame the plantation owner is not that simple. Then there is a common tribal clearing of land, shifting cultivation. Then there is transmigration. During the President Suharto's regime, he encouraged more people to spread out across to other islands to live there. And naturally, when they go there, they have to clear land. And they don't have a lot of money to get excavators, bulldozers, manpower. What's the best and cheap way to clear land? Is by fire. So that policy itself has a price. I could go on, but I'm writing this book, which will be published by Edward Elgar of UK, with a colleague called Jinhua Chow, and he is the co-editor of the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management, and he's at the University of Michigan. So this book will come out in 2014, where we will cover all kinds of transboundary pollution, not just the forest fires in Indonesia, but the acid rain, Shenzhen in Hong Kong, Eastern China's factories to Western Japan, the Mekong River Basin. These are all examples of transboundary pollution. The final part of my talk, and that's the second pause, going to the third one, is I will deal with this, in a small way, the challenge of climate change. Now, it is perfectly understandable that many countries in the West, the advanced countries, naturally, they want a lot more done to combat climate change and global warming, because these countries are wealthier, they are more affluent, and when they are wealthier and more affluent, the quality of life becomes very important. And environment is therefore an ingredient to the quality of life. In the poor Asian countries, in Africa, Latin America, and so on, they struggle to make a living for a substantial part of the population. So therefore, they need bread, they need butter, right? They need roof. Those are more important to them. So the priority is different, and therefore, you can understand why there's always this conflict when you have the multilateral global treaty negotiations on climate change. But yet at the same time, one cannot blame, like in the poor countries in Asia, we cannot blame the West for spoiling the environment, because China, India, and so on, they are the future contributors to carbon emission at such a substantial level that they are going to spoil the environment. They're going to have more carbon emissions in the future. So therefore, the historical argument of blaming the West is wrong. To me, we should stop the blame and just focus on what can be done. And what can be done, as I said earlier, is not top-down approach, but encourage good practices bottom-up and find in what ways can the wealthier countries of the West support that bottom-up approach. And I think it is particularly important because many countries in Asia, like in China, they are growing fast, so they need new factories and so on. They have a chance to start with new technology. In the West, where you have the older factories and so on, to transform is much more costly, right? So there is possibility of convergence. Now, much of the discussion on climate change has dealt with the science of climate change. But I think they are still very much lacking in economic policies, in economic estimates of what are the impact of climate change. You remember the Yale studies by William Nordhaus, one of the top economists working on global warming and climate change. He produced some data. And then you remember Nicholas Stern, the UK guy. He also produced some data. And they are different by miles apart on damages. So there's still a lack of agreement of what are those economic damages and impact. And then there was a talk about, we keep thinking about reducing carbon emissions. That is mitigation. Now, given that we have our constraints, why not focus more on adaptation? And I think the Asian Development Bank has adopted that approach to focus on adaptation. I think that's the right move. We cannot wait for all the countries to adjust, reduce carbon emission. We should adapt. But that doesn't mean we don't do anything to reduce. We still do it. But that should not be the focus, but I think adaptation. Now, unless we know what are the magnitude of damages, we cannot make good policy decisions. Just like if you don't have enough data, you cannot do good analysis. Similarly, in the climate change area, as far as economics is concerned, we need good data. There's also the question of the cost of global warming. You see the media, everything, the IPCC, they talk about the cost. Yes, we know the cost. But there are also the benefits from global warming. I think the cost is greater than the benefits. But I think that one should not neglect the benefits as well. Some areas of the world, productivity of crops will increase. The opening up of the Arctic will lead to the discovery of new resource materials, as well as a new passage to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific, bypassing the Straits of Malacca and Singapore. That means transport cost is going to come down, which also means carbon emission will come down. That's savings, that's a benefit. And I was told that green plants actually thrive better on a carbon-rich environment. So you see, and that means more growth, more greenery growth, you know. There are benefits. So the correct thing is not just to focus on the cost, but also focus on net benefits, the cost minus the benefits. And with better idea of what the net benefits are, then economic policies can lead to more informed decision making. I'm going to skip one slide. You are familiar with the Kuznets curve, in which it was argued that initially, as the country grows, they're going to have a lot of pollution and all the problem. But as the country reaches a certain stage, then people will demand less growth because they have all the income and job. The next thing they care is quality of life, which includes environment. And therefore, society will change their behavior and demand better air quality and so on. Then the Kuznets curve predicts that after some time, the curve will bend down. Okay? And the argument is that there are a lot of tests to test for this, whether it's true or not, that people will change. Okay? So that's one test of the Kuznets curve. Now, I have suggested another approach. Not because I want to test the Kuznets curve. I was more interested in this. All government has a limited budget. With a limited budget, government allocates it to different ministries. Ministry of Environment is going to receive a budget from the central administration. The Ministry of Environment needs to prioritize how much of their own budget is allocated to water, to air pollution, to hygiene and cleanliness, to so on. They need to allocate their own budget. How best to allocate? So I was concerned about that problem. So I learned that how best they allocate depends upon what they perceive, maybe through just their own gathering of data, and what they perceive as engineers, as scientists, what are important areas of environment to tackle. Now I say that is not sufficient. I think it's more important for the society to decide on this as what is the priority. So I crafted this follow-up research on damage schedules. This damage schedule method is simple to use. Basically, it goes to the people, and we can still go to the experts. We can go to the people and ask the people, I give you a factual information, do you think we should deal more with air pollution or water pollution? And then after that, air pollution or noise pollution? Air pollution or something else? So we have a 2x2, what we call a pairwise comparison. Then upon which we devise a scale, then we get an idea from the scale by how much do people prioritize water over air, air over hygiene, hygiene over noise, noise over something else. Now this is a different method than say, I go to the people and ask them, I give you a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I say, rank them. Like in marketing survey, you get on the streets and the companies. Why? Because in the pairwise method, you know exactly by how much they are, how much apart they are. But in the simple ranking system, all we know is air is more important than water, water is more important than hygiene. We don't know by how much. So if we don't know by how much, the government, when they allocate the budget, will just allocate, I give more to here, first one, less second one, and third one. But in the pairwise method, we know the first one is very important to allocate. The second and the third are about the same in terms of priority to the society. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether we give them about the same money. And then, but we know the last one should be given the least amount. So the pairwise comparison method is simple to use, easy to understand. Now you contrast this to the existing literature. For those of you who study environmental economics, the method they use, contingent valuation. Contingent valuation asks the people, how much are you willing to pay to value something? Now, can you imagine, many parts of Asia are very poor. The poor farmers, the uneducated people, they cannot tell you how much they are willing to pay. But they can tell you, do I prefer the government to spend money on water irrigation project or better lighting? They can tell you. Simple, right? Then you can do your scales of reference. In one of my earlier studies, which was published in Applied Economics, the comparison was done between Singapore and Bangkok, applying the damage schedule approach, where we used 3 items: education, transport, and environment. And then we define some examples of transport, some examples of education, some examples of environment. And then we go to the people, I think it was a few hundred people, and we try to, this is not the final truth, we just exploratory in the method, right? So we get from the people how they rank them, and we got this. Now, you can see from the slides that environmental concerns are higher in Singapore than in Bangkok. And it makes sense because Singapore, they have a more affluent, so they demand a higher quality of life. They place more importance on environmental issues. And so on. So if you go back to this slide, right, you can see that clearly by how much and so on. For those of you who are interested in the technique and the papers, you can refer to some of these papers that were done. Now, it might come as a surprise to you that one of your Thai colleagues was the world's first to apply these techniques. In Phuket, actually, she applied it. Chuan Pak Di. I don't know which university he's at or she's at, but she applied it there, and I thought the method was very interesting. I picked up the method, I refined a little bit, and applied elsewhere. And these years corresponds to the publications that you can just Google my name and you can see it. Now, what is interesting about the damage schedule approach does not simply apply to environment. Now I've just finished a study that look at how you can apply the same technique to other types of goods. For example, central government allocates the budget to Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Youth, Sports, Culture, whatever, right? How does the central government know how much to allocate? Same problem. Remember, we talked about in environmental ministry, they have to allocate budget to water, to air, and so on. But in the central government, they are faced the same problem, how to allocate to different ministries. So if you use the damage schedule approach, you can actually get a scale of importance as well. Conclusion, I think this is about climate change. We need less talk and more action. Sustainable development is too elusive. Good idea, elusive to apply. We should focus on implementation. We need pragmatism. We need to follow the 8 methods which I propose to deal with local environmental concern. And if you do good, then the world will be a better place. We try to encourage wealthier countries to support us in promoting our good environmental policies. The fact that environmental problems are economic problems. You know, whenever I teach the course on environmental economics, the first opening session of the first lecture is this: are environmental problems economic problems? That means, do they share the same characteristics, the nature of an economic problem? And if you think about it, they do. All economic problems have the following characteristics. They are scarce. Because they are scarce, goods are scarce, land is scarce, everything is scarce, we need to make choices. How to make the choices? The choices are based on opportunity cost, based on trade-off. Then you choose accordingly. Okay? All environmental problems, you think about it, green goods, land, air, they're all scarce. They all have trade-off. We all want to minimize the opportunity cost to make the best decision. So if you understand that environmental problems are economic problems, you will understand how to use economic instruments to solve environmental problems. The other thing that people often forget is the cost to society. You know, the media often forget that there is a cost to controlling pollution and environmental problem. We always focus on the pollution, all the damages that affect us, but we don't focus on how much it would take to control all this. This is also a cost to society. If you pass stricter laws, You change the requirements for car ownership. You need a special equipment. You have to change, you need to price the externality.